January 26, 1945, 2:47 p.m., Holtzwihr, Alsace-Lorraine, France. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy, 20 years old, stood alone on a burning M10 tank destroyer, its ammunition compartment blazing beneath his boots. Around him, an entire company of German infantry and 6 Panzer tanks were advancing through the snow-covered fields, their gray uniforms barely visible against the winter landscape. The metallic taste of fear filled his mouth as he gripped the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the burning vehicle. Behind him, his men had retreated to the tree line, following his direct order to fall back. Ahead of him, 250 German soldiers were closing in, expecting to find a company of American defenders. Instead, they found one Texan farm boy who had just picked up a phone to call in artillery on his own position. Murphy's hands were numb from the cold, his uniform soaked with melted snow and diesel fuel from the burning tank destroyer. The Germans were 50 yards away and closing fast when Murphy started laughing, not the nervous laughter of fear, but the genuine amusement of a man who had just realized something absolutely absurd about his situation. He was standing on a burning tank full of explosives, surrounded by an entire German company, and he was about to demonstrate why the U.S. Army had promoted a teenage orphan from Texas to officer rank in less than 2 years of combat. The story begins 6 months earlier, in the summer of 1944, when Murphy's company was rebuilding after the Normandy campaign. Murphy had already earned a reputation as an unusually effective killer, but his superiors were concerned about his size. At 5'5" and 112 pounds, he looked more like a high school freshman than a combat infantry officer. What they didn't understand was that Murphy's slight frame was exactly what made him so dangerous. He moved through forests and urban terrain like a ghost, appearing in positions where larger soldiers couldn't fit, striking from angles the enemy never expected. His hometown of Kingston, Texas, had prepared him for this war in ways the Army manual writers never anticipated. Growing up during the Great Depression, hunting rabbits and squirrels to feed his family, Murphy had learned to make every shot count because ammunition cost money his family didn't have. He developed an almost supernatural ability to judge distance, wind, and the movement patterns of his targets. More importantly, he learned to remain calm under pressure because missing meant his siblings went hungry. The psychological profile that made Murphy exceptional was forged by poverty and responsibility, not military training. While other soldiers fought for country and patriotism, Murphy fought with the methodical precision of someone who had been killing to survive since age 12. The German offensive that would make Murphy a legend was part of Operation Nordwind, Hitler's last major offensive on the Western Front. The German High Command had identified the Colmar pocket in Alsace-Lorraine as a critical strategic position. If they could break through American lines here, they could threaten the entire Allied advance toward the Rhine River. German intelligence had correctly identified that American forces in this sector were stretched thin, with inexperienced replacement troops holding positions that should have been defended by full-strength veteran units. What German intelligence had not identified was the presence of Audie Murphy's company in the exact center of their planned breakthrough point. Murphy's unit, Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, had been reduced to just 19 men after months of continuous combat. They were exhausted, undersupplied, and technically should have been pulled back for rest and refit. Instead, they were holding a mile-long section of front that normally required an entire battalion to defend properly. Murphy had positioned his men in a thin line of foxholes along the edge of a forest, with orders to hold until reinforcements arrived. The reinforcements were 12 hours away. The German attack was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. At exactly 2:15 p.m., German artillery began falling on American positions with devastating accuracy. The barrage was so intense that the frozen ground liquefied under the concussion waves, turning foxholes into muddy graves. Murphy moved from position to position, crawling through the artillery fire to check on his men and redistribute ammunition. What he found was worse than he had expected. 3 of his men were dead, 5 were wounded too badly to fight effectively, and the rest were showing signs of combat fatigue that made their effectiveness questionable. The radio operator reported that all communications with battalion headquarters had been cut by the artillery barrage. They were completely isolated, facing an unknown number of German troops with no support and no way to call for help. Murphy made a decision that violated every principle of military tactics he had been taught. Instead of ordering a fighting withdrawal to more defensible positions, he decided to hold his ground and make the Germans pay such a heavy price for their advance that it would disrupt their entire offensive timeline. The sound of diesel engines and tank tracks announced the arrival of the German armor. 6 Panzer IV tanks emerged from the tree line 800 yards away, followed by what Murphy estimated to be at least 250 infantry soldiers. The tanks were advancing in a standard formation, with infantry spread out behind them for protection. Standard American doctrine called for immediate withdrawal when facing armor without anti-tank weapons. Murphy's company had no bazookas, no anti-tank guns, and no armor support. What they did have was one M10 tank destroyer that had been abandoned by its crew after taking a non-penetrating hit to its turret. The vehicle was still operational, but its crew had evacuated, believing it was more dangerous than protective. Murphy examined the M10 and discovered that while the main gun was disabled, the .50 caliber machine gun was still functional and had over 300 rounds of ammunition available. The tank destroyer was positioned perfectly to provide overlapping fields of fire across the entire German approach route. The only problem was that someone would have to operate the machine gun from an exposed position on top of the vehicle, making them a perfect target for every German weapon in range. If you want to discover how one soldier turned certain death into the most devastating 74 seconds in military history, please leave a like on this video. This helps us share more forgotten stories like this. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to catch the next episodes. Murphy ordered his remaining effective soldiers to fall back to secondary positions in the woods, giving them clear fields of fire to support him, but keeping them out of the immediate kill zone. He climbed onto the burning M10 tank destroyer and took control of the .50 caliber machine gun. The Germans had advanced to within 100 yards of his position when Murphy opened fire. His first burst caught the lead squad of German infantry completely by surprise. They had been expecting to overrun a demoralized American defensive position, not face accurate, sustained machine gun fire from an unexpected angle. Murphy's opening burst killed 6 Germans instantly and wounded 4 others, causing the entire lead company to go to ground and begin searching for the source of the fire. This gave Murphy exactly what he needed: stationary targets at a known range with predictable cover positions. What happened next defied every principle of small unit tactics and probability theory that military analysts had developed over centuries of warfare. Murphy began working his way systematically through the German formation, using the .50 caliber machine gun like a sniper rifle. The heavy machine gun bullets could penetrate the light cover the Germans were using, and Murphy's hunting experience allowed him to predict where soldiers would move when under fire. He would fire a burst at one position, forcing Germans to move to what they thought was better cover, then fire at their new position before they could get settled. The psychological effect was devastating. The Germans realized they were facing someone who could predict their movements and was shooting through cover they had assumed was protective. Within the first 30 seconds of engagement, Murphy had killed 12 Germans and wounded 8 others. The German company commander tried to organize a flanking movement, sending 2 squads to approach Murphy's position from the left side. Murphy saw them moving and called in artillery fire on his own position, using the field telephone that was somehow still connected despite the earlier barrage. The artillery strike landed 50 yards from Murphy's position, killing the entire flanking force and setting the M10 tank destroyer fully ablaze. Murphy was now standing on a burning tank full of ammunition and fuel, continuing to operate the machine gun while calling in artillery strikes danger close to his own position. The German tanks tried to target him directly, but their main guns couldn't depress enough to hit the tank destroyer at close range. Their machine guns were ineffective because Murphy was partially protected by the M10's turret armor. More importantly, the smoke and flames from the burning tank destroyer made it almost impossible for the Germans to get an accurate fix on Murphy's exact position. From their perspective, they were receiving devastating accurate fire from inside a massive fire and smoke cloud. Some of the German soldiers later reported believing they were fighting a supernatural entity rather than a human being. How many of you have a grandfather, father, or uncle who served and never talked about what they lived through? These stories are disappearing. Leave a comment now saying just, "My grandfather served," or "My father served." When you comment, you're not just honoring your family. You're preserving memory for the next generations. Let's create a living memorial here in the comments. Murphy continued firing for another 44 seconds, methodically working through the German formation. The .50 caliber machine gun was designed for sustained fire, but Murphy was pushing it beyond its intended limits. The barrel was glowing red hot, and the receiver was so hot that the metal expansion was affecting the weapon's accuracy. Murphy compensated by adjusting his aim point based on the changing characteristics of the overheated weapon. This required an understanding of metallurgy and ballistics that most soldiers didn't possess, but Murphy had learned about metal expansion and contraction from working on farm equipment in Texas. Every piece of mechanical knowledge he had gained growing up poor in rural America was now being applied to kill German soldiers with unprecedented efficiency. The German company was being systematically destroyed by someone they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't effectively return fire against. The turning point came when the German company commander realized his force was being annihilated and ordered a general assault on Murphy's position. Every remaining German soldier fixed bayonets and charged directly toward the burning M10 tank destroyer. This was exactly what Murphy had been waiting for. Instead of individual soldiers moving unpredictably through cover, he now had a massed formation of targets moving in a straight line toward his position. Murphy emptied his remaining ammunition into the charging Germans, firing in controlled bursts that created overlapping fields of death across their approach route. The now 50 caliber bullets were traveling at 910 feet per second, delivering 971 foot-pounds of energy on impact. At the range the Germans were charging from, these bullets were traveling through multiple human targets before losing effectiveness. A single burst from Murphy's machine gun was killing or wounding 3 to 4 German soldiers simultaneously. When Murphy's ammunition ran out, he grabbed an M1 carbine and continued firing at the few Germans who had survived the charge. The entire engagement had lasted exactly 1 minute and 14 seconds from Murphy's first shot to the death of the last German soldier in range. When the smoke cleared, Murphy counted 43 German bodies within 200 yards of his position, with an unknown number of wounded who had crawled or been dragged away by survivors. 6 German tanks had been abandoned or destroyed, and the entire offensive in this sector had been stopped cold. Murphy had single-handedly destroyed an entire German company while standing on a burning tank destroyer and calling artillery fire on his own position. The mathematics of what Murphy accomplished are almost incomprehensible. 43 confirmed kills in 74 seconds averages to 1 German soldier killed every one. 72 seconds of sustained combat. This rate of fire and accuracy has never been matched or exceeded in recorded military history. German after-action reports, captured later in the war, describe the engagement as encountering heavy resistance from prepared American positions with armor and artillery support. The German unit commanders never realized they had been fighting a single American soldier. Their reports estimated they had faced at least a full American company with tank support and pre-registered artillery coverage. When German intelligence officers tried to reconstruct what had happened at Holzwihr, they concluded that American forces had used the burning tank destroyer as a deception to conceal a larger defensive position. The idea that one soldier could inflict such casualties was considered so improbable that German military analysts rejected it, even when presented with eyewitness testimony from their own survivors. The immediate aftermath of Murphy's action was chaos on both sides. American forward observers, watching through binoculars from positions several hundred yards away, reported seeing the German attack collapse but couldn't explain how or why. They could see the burning M10 tank destroyer and the scattered German casualties, but the smoke and distance made it impossible to understand what had actually happened. When Murphy finally climbed down from the burning tank destroyer and walked back to his men's positions, several of them didn't recognize him at first. His uniform was singed and black with smoke. His face was covered with soot and cordite residue, and he was moving with the mechanical precision of someone in mild shock. It wasn't until Murphy started giving orders for collecting German weapons and ammunition that his men realized their lieutenant had just accomplished something that would be talked about for the rest of their lives. The German response to Murphy's action revealed how completely the attack had been disrupted. Instead of continuing their offensive as planned, German forces in the entire sector went into defensive positions and began requesting reinforcements. Radio intercepts revealed that German commanders believed they had encountered a new type of American defensive system and were requesting intelligence updates on American tactics and equipment. The offensive that was supposed to break through American lines and threaten the Allied advance to the Rhine River was abandoned after losing an entire company to what German intelligence described as unknown American defensive innovations. Murphy had not only stopped the German attack in his sector, he had created so much confusion and uncertainty that German forces across the entire front began questioning their intelligence about American defensive capabilities. Murphy's company received replacement soldiers and equipment within 48 hours of the engagement. Word of what had happened spread through the American command structure with unprecedented speed. Generals who had never heard of Audie Murphy were reading detailed reports of his action and trying to understand how one soldier could achieve results that normally required battalion-level operations. Military analysts began studying Murphy's tactics and trying to develop training programs that could replicate his effectiveness. What they discovered was that Murphy's success couldn't be reduced to a series of teachable techniques. His effectiveness came from a combination of natural ability, specific life experiences, and psychological characteristics that couldn't be artificially reproduced. The Army tried to create more soldiers like Murphy and failed every time because they were trying to replicate the results without understanding the fundamental differences in background and motivation that made those results possible. The weapons Murphy used in the engagement became objects of almost religious significance to American troops in the area. The .50 caliber machine gun was recovered from the burned-out M10 tank destroyer and rebuilt for continued service. Soldiers would request to see the weapon that had killed 43 Germans in 74 seconds, and many reported feeling more confident in their own combat effectiveness just from handling it. The psychological impact of Murphy's action extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. American troops throughout the European theater began believing that individual soldiers could achieve impossible results if they had enough courage and determination. This belief became a force multiplier that improved American combat effectiveness across multiple units and operations. Murphy received the Medal of Honor for his actions at Holzwihr, but the citation doesn't capture the full scope of what he accomplished. The official language describes conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. But this bureaucratic phrasing fails to convey the absolute impossibility of what Murphy did. Military historians have spent decades trying to find comparable actions by individual soldiers in recorded history and have found none. Murphy's 74 seconds of combat represent a statistical anomaly that challenges fundamental assumptions about human performance under stress and the limitations of individual effectiveness in warfare. After the war, Murphy struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, but in 1945 was simply called battle fatigue or soldier's heart. He had nightmares about the German soldiers he had killed, often reliving the engagement at Holzwihr in dreams that woke him screaming. Friends and family members reported that Murphy would sometimes pause in the middle of normal conversations, staring at something no one else could see, his hands unconsciously moving as if operating a machine gun. The psychological cost of achieving the impossible was a burden Murphy carried for the rest of his life. He self-medicated with alcohol and prescription pills, attempting to quiet memories that civilian life had no framework for processing or understanding. Murphy's post-war career in Hollywood movies was an attempt to find purpose and meaning after experiencing combat that was more intense than anything civilian life could offer. He starred in 44 films, including playing himself in To Hell and Back, the 1955 movie about his war experiences. But Murphy later admitted that acting in war movies was psychologically damaging because it required him to re-experience combat situations that triggered his PTSD symptoms. The man who had faced 250 German soldiers without flinching found himself unable to handle the simulated violence of Hollywood war films. Murphy died in a plane crash in 1971, at age 45, struggling with debts, addiction, and the long-term psychological effects of combat trauma that the Veterans Administration was just beginning to understand and treat. The weapons and equipment Murphy used at Holtzwihr can still be seen today at the Audie Murphy American Cotton Museum in Greenville, Texas. The rebuilt .50 caliber machine gun is displayed alongside Murphy's Medal of Honor, his other decorations, and personal artifacts from his military service. Visitors often ask museum guides to explain how the engagement was possible, and the guides have learned to focus on the documented facts rather than trying to explain the psychological and physiological factors that made Murphy's performance achievable. The museum receives visitors from around the world, including German veterans and their families, who come to pay respects to an opponent they consider worthy of honor, despite the destruction he inflicted on their countrymen. The tactical innovations Murphy demonstrated at Holtzwihr influenced American military doctrine for decades after the war. His use of artillery fire, danger close to his own position, became standard training for forward observers and infantry officers. His method of using sustained machine gun fire to control enemy movement patterns was incorporated into machine gun theory and practice manuals used by the U.S. Army through the Vietnam War. Most importantly, Murphy's action proved that individual initiative and aggressive tactics could overcome seemingly impossible odds, a lesson that became central to American small unit leadership training. Military academies still study Murphy's action as an example of how exceptional individuals can change the outcome of much larger operations through superior tactics and absolute refusal to accept defeat. The German soldiers who survived the engagement at Holtzwihr were interrogated extensively by Allied intelligence officers who wanted to understand how American defensive tactics had become so effective. The German accounts were consistent. They described facing what seemed like supernatural opposition that could predict their movements and shoot through cover they had assumed was protective. Several German veterans later wrote memoirs that mentioned the engagement, describing it as the moment they realized the American Army had developed new tactical capabilities that made German offensive operations impossibly dangerous. These accounts helped Allied intelligence understand that Murphy's action had created strategic effects far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Murphy's story demonstrates that warfare often comes down to individual human beings making decisions under impossible circumstances and then accepting the consequences of those decisions for the rest of their lives. His 74 seconds of combat at Holtzwihr changed the course of a battle, influenced the outcome of a campaign, and affected the way two armies thought about tactics and individual capability. More importantly, it proved that human beings are capable of achieving results that seem impossible until someone actually achieves them. Murphy showed that the difference between heroism and suicide is often measured in fractions of seconds and depends on factors that can't be predicted, quantified, or replicated through training. If this story moved you the same way it moved us, do us a favor. Leave your like on this video. Each like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every day. Stories about farm boys who became legends, soldiers who defied impossible odds, individuals who changed history through courage and determination. Real people, real heroism. Leave a comment now and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Canada, Australia, Brazil. Our community extends around the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if anyone in your family served. Just tell us you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring that Audie Murphy doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that possible. Educational note. This account combines documented historical facts about Audie Murphy's Medal of Honor action at Holtzwihr with dramatic narrative elements for educational and entertainment purposes. While the core events and Murphy's extraordinary combat performance are historically verified, some dialogue and specific details have been enhanced for storytelling effect.